and good morning. I'm David Boles, and this is Boles TV. So glad you are with us. 9 a.m. Eastern in our 6th or 7th week of live broadcasting. It's been quite an interesting experience across many different vistas, valleys, pinnacles, punches, regions, moralities, joys, disappointments, and contentment. And today's no different. Today we're going to have an interesting time together as we talk about what's been happening in the world around us on a moral scale and an emotional scale. And morality and the goodness of your soul has nothing to do with religion. Probably has something to do with the law, because the law is there to enforce morality. Some people don't seem to believe that, but they don't want you driving fast, they don't want you murdering people, they don't want you punching people in the street. Some call that common human decency. Other people call that an interesting sort of morality. So here we are, messy hair and all. Having a hard time with the hair this week. I don't know what's going on. I think it's the weather. As a friend of mine said in New York City, it's completely dark at 4:45 in the afternoon. What am I going to do for the next 3 months? That's what the time change does for you. And it's cold, and it's windy, and there's no sun, and it gets dark at 4:45 p.m. It is a little bit of a misery. So you turn on the bright lights. Hi. Get up in the morning. Say hello to your friends across the world. Hello. Evening. Afternoon, night. Hey, here we are together. In it together. So in case you missed the show yesterday, this is us here now together saying hello. Let's see if we can say hello on our moderator account, see if that comes across. Yes, hi, that's very nice. Let's see if our title thing wasn't working yesterday, so let's see if that's working. This all has to do, I believe, with our name change. Okay, that's good. The title of his Boles TV is Boles TV. Very funny. Okay, I didn't write that. That's a bot. Type exclamation point quote. The process of writing is the foundation of creation. Okay, I wrote that. Boles books. I guess I should go back and change those quotes. Write myself a note. Quotes to Boles TV. Attribute them. Quotes to Boles TV. And that is the change that we have going on with us today. This week and now and forever, we are no longer Boles Books as our username on Twitch. We are now Boles TV. And in the greater realm of the internet, we are Boles.TV. B-O-L-E-S.TV. Type that into a web browser. Pop, 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 pop. You come right here. Hey, here we are. We're live together. Boles TV. But when you make a change like that, a username change like that, everything changes. All your links have to be reformatted to remove Boles Books and put in Boles TV. So if you saved our old link at Boles Books and you go there, you get some kind of weird message from Twitch saying, unless you have a time machine, I think you've got the wrong place. You're not in the right place. Now, I don't know why they just can't forward our old username to our new username for a limited time so people can find us, but they appear not to want to do that. So here we are at Boles.TV. And we're very appreciative to have you here with us in chat. If you're interested in being able to watch our deep library of video on demand, please do that by subscribing, going to Boles.TV, hit the subscribe button, and you can get access to all of our old videos, and you will also get ad-free access to this, boom, wonderful live stream. And we have to run ads because that's how Twitch pays their bills. They host us for free. They don't charge us anything to be here. But if you don't want advertising, they're going to charge you for that. So it seems fair to me. It's completely in your hands if you want to subscribe or not. So Ridley Scott, and you saw him when we first started this conversation, is a big time director. Lots of hits on his hands. Blade Runner is probably his biggest, most famous movie. Thelma and Louise, Gladiator, Black Hawk Down, The Martian, which I thought was a wonderful movie. He has a great big resume of movies, and recently he's hit a stream of bad luck where he's had two great big giant movies with lots of stars, and they've both pretty much flopped within a couple of weeks and months of each other. And his first movie that flopped was not that one. That's his segment. The first movie that flopped was The Last Duel. Okay? That's this. Starring Matt Damon, Ben Affleck, Adam Driver. And I really don't know what it is. It looks like sort of a House of Thrones thing, but he says it's not. But nobody went. Didn't make any money. And Ridley Scott went on television and blamed it all on millennials. And millennials are topping out at like age 45 now. And maybe people who are 45 years old don't want to go to a Game of Thrones movie. I don't know. But he blamed it on them. He said all they do is they're on their phones. They're on the internet. They're not paying attention. It was sort of devastating for him because he didn't understand why people didn't want to go see his show. But it was kind of unfortunate and bad form that he went on television and blamed the failure of his movie on people who maybe were aged out of wanting to see that kind of movie. So he seems very bitter about that. And now his latest episode, his latest movie, House of Gucci, big flop too. And this analysis says adult dramas are not working, that young kids don't want to go see House of Gucci or the Adam Driver movie. Director Ridley Scott's House of Gucci was yet another test for whether older audiences, 45 plus, would head to the theater for an adult skewing star-powered non-franchise drama. And by most accounts, it failed. And I think it's true because if you're older and wiser and smarter, you're really not ready to go out into the world and sit in a movie theater. Now, why you can't also release it streaming as well and make a deal with everybody who was involved in the movie, because we're living a new world now where we're in a pandemic. They don't want to. So what does he do? He complains, he blames other people. It's very unfortunate. And here they talk about The Last Duel, also directed by Scott, suffered a worse fate when it was released last month. So within a month of each other, he's had two great big giant flops. It's another adult drama with movie stars. The movie bombed with $4.8 million its first weekend. It grossed just $10 million domestically and $28 cents globally. Now, you knew House of Gucci was probably going to have a hard time. When you read interviews with Lady Gaga, who is one of the actresses in House of Gucci, and she says for a year in her real life, she spoke with an Italian accent. I guess to prepare herself mentally for the movie or to make sure that she spoke with a proper accent, I don't know. But I'm not sure that trained actors who have a lot of talent do that kind of thing. It's very bizarre. And the story is sort of about a bunch of really awful people who have a lot of money. And sometimes I think that America is sort of past that now. We're past the age of just idolizing the rich, and now they're kind of in the mode of wanting to mock them on television. unfortunate. Some other good news that's in sort of relationship to what we spoke about yesterday, and collecting and hoarding and what keeps its value. Will the Beatles' paraphernalia, memorabilia, be as valuable in 20 years as it is now? I don't know. Julian Lennon thinks so. Paul McCartney thinks so. Well, one thing that seems to have staying power is Albert Einstein, and I understand why. He's unlocking the secrets of the world and universe in which we live. So that's a good thing, that people are paying a lot of money, 11 million pounds. It's like, what, $15 million? For a manuscript that they discovered, we spoke about last week. And hey, they thought it was going to sell for $3 million, and it sold for $13 million. So I think there is hope for humanity. That it's absolutely possible to find your way into the future by going back to the past and then valuing what you find and wanting to preserve it. And speaking of preservation and wants and needs and who we are and what we want to be, leads us to our next topic of conversation. Now, as you may know from this live stream conversation and everything I've written over the past 40 years, I have in many ways dedicated my life to the nonprofit world. Started in community theater back in the Midwest. Always had the idea of, hey, let's put on a show. It was never about the big money, the big dollar, advertising. Not even really about fame or recognition, just getting together with talented people and doing things right. So I have lived my life that way. And a lot of people make fun of me for it. They say, oh, you don't have any money because you don't charge enough, or you just give away your talents, or. And you don't put a lot of investment in what they're saying, because all they're trying to do is to mark you so they can make money off of you. And all of my projects, to this day, I probably get 25 appeals in email saying, I want to put advertising on your stuff. And I don't do that because, in most instances, for what I have done over the past 30 to 40 years, it's not appropriate. Because I've asked people to work with me for no pay and for free, and I will do the same thing, and we are in this together to create something special and different that is nonpartisan and non-vested in the commercial business world. And there are people who agree with you and people who don't agree with you. And there are people who agree with you and then who change their mind later. And that is a problem. The betrayal from the least expected. So many years ago, I started a blog that was initially called Go Inside Magazine. It was a magazine, online magazine. It wasn't known as blogs then, it was just a web page. Then we changed it, and it became Urban Semiotic, and then we had about 14 different blogs, and then we put them all together into Boles blogs. And over the years, I've published probably 100 different authors and writers in that blog, which is now bolesblogs.com. And the agreement I have with every author that I publish, that I discover, let's say, is I don't accept any advertising. I'm not making any money off of this endeavor. So I'm not going to pay you anything, but I will publish you, and I will promote you, and I will help your career. And as long as I am able, I will keep up the publication of this entity, because it costs me bandwidth and servers. Hello. Head of police, thank you so much for following. And I will help you establish a career. But I'm not charging you any money. Some places do that. And I'm not going to pay you any money, because that complicates things, because then I have to become a formal corporation and taxes and everything. But if this is all a volunteer effort, where I'm just paying for server space and bandwidth and you're contributing, then we all work together. Let's put on a show. Let's write a blog. And it all works. And it does. It all works until somebody decides that they want to go back on their word and change their mind. And that often happens. And for many reasons, that is why I really no longer publish new authors anymore. I'm not interested in that kind of accusation and harassment from people that I believe that I have helped a lot. And there are lots of people I've worked with who still believe and who still have faith. So what usually happens with some of these people is you publish their work for 20 years online with you, and then they go off and do their own thing, which is fine. And then they decide they want to come and basically steal back their article from your blog and republish it on their blog or on their website. And when they get caught doing that, these people usually have two attitudes. One, I didn't know. I couldn't do that. But they don't take it down. Second, it was my article to begin with. I was merely loaning it to you. Well, that's not the agreement we had, or what you signed up to do. 3, they just want a copy of it, and they're publishing it. Well, the problem with all of that is that the internet machines do not like two identical copies of the exact same thing on the internet. Because one of them is either plagiarized or copied or used without permission. And those search engines usually punish both parties for the copies. And you get lowered down the list. If you write something exclusively and you want to keep it there and have it indexed one place for 20 years as an author and as a publisher, that helps you a lot because it's longevity. It proves status. And 20 years later, you say, well, I'm going to go copy and paste what I said I would leave there and put in my new blog. And when I get caught, I'm going to say, oh, I didn't know, when you absolutely know. And you become morally corrupt. Well, that's a decision you make. That's not a decision I make. But when you do get caught, then I have decisions to make as the publisher of Origin. And basically, I have 3 ways I can go. I can ask you to take it down. I can force you to take it down. And I will win, because I have 20 years of progeny on my side, and you'll be shut down, and you will be removed from where you are being hosted. Or 3, I can just chalk it up to an experience, cancel culture, delete you from my life so I don't ever have to worry about you again. And this has happened maybe 3 or 4 times over my career as a publisher. The great majority of who I call my authors that I work with, publish it, leave it, they understand it. Some say, well, you're not the New York Times. You can delete it and give it back to me. And I say, no, I'm not the New York Times. But the theory that protects the New York Times is the same theory that protects me, and it's called copyright. DMCA is on my side, not your side in this. You will lose. And if I really want to be nasty, I can have, I can go after you for damages, for stealing my content. I wrote the article, but I published it. And these are very smart people who are playing a very dumb, selfish game. And for what end? I don't know. And honestly, I don't care. And that's why now I've come to the point where it's really not worth the effort and the pain to try to deal with those sorts of people again, because it doesn't matter in the end. Because people are going to do whatever they want, no matter what they said or what they want, and they'll challenge you. Okay, well, come after me, come and sue me. And a lot of these people have no idea what a pit that would put them in. So, that's the interesting part of living, is you think you know people over the years, and you think that you have supported people over the years, and they have supported you too by considering the publication and all of that. that. But, you know, when you publish a new author, there's a lot of editing you have to do. You have to work with them a lot. You have to step them through the process. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort that I was willing to do at one point in my life, but I am now no longer willing to do that same sort of thing. I'd rather just go my own way, do my own thing, betray my own self, and not worry about it, because it's not going to happen. But when people reveal themselves to you and you think you know them for 20 years, and then it turns out that you really don't know them at all, and that it was all just a big facade, a big game, a big fake, and it's all about them in the end and not about the project or the purpose, it's a little bit of a disappointment. And on that note, I can see an automatic advertisement is going to start very soon, so I'm going to beat it to the punch, take a little break, and we'll continue this conversation momentarily. All right? See you soon. we are back from break. I forgot to put up the intermission screen, so I'll put up the intermission screen now, just because this is what we do when we go on break. Hello. All right, now we're back from break, so we just go back to our main screen. So, putting the finishing touches on this conversation about the morally corrupt who end up surprising you in their betrayal is really an unfortunate situation, because you realize that knowing the person for as long as you did has turned out just to be one big, fat, ugly, and despicable lie. And that's the way of the world. That's the way of the modern concepts of surviving and beating the other guy. And all through my life, I've had people, just outsiders, and some people I used to work with, who would make accusations and say, oh, you're making money on these projects on the back end. And I said, well, how? Oh, you're selling advertising, you're selling access, you're selling the data to somebody. I said, well, how? I mean, you're making an accusation against me in public, and what you're saying is not true, and you cannot prove it because what you're saying is not happening. And that kind of person, they just don't have any kind of concept about volunteerism or doing the right thing. To them, it's all about money. Why would you do all of this work for free, for no benefit? Well, if money is your only benefit, then that's the kind of person you are. But for me, as I was told early on, when I was doing things for free back in the Midwest, you do these sorts of projects voluntarily for the goodness of your own soul. And when you then later turn on yourself by committing an act of betrayal, well, that's probably not really great for your soul. So beware of who you work with, even though you really not know who they are. You may have a pretty good idea, but their behavior will trick you. That's been my experience anyway, and that doesn't mean it's going to be that way forever, but I've learned that I should be more careful with my time and my efforts. Because in the end, as we know, people tend to always disappoint you. And maybe that's too strict, too rigid. But in my world, there's either right or there is wrong. There is not a lot of gray area when it comes to doing the right thing. In policy, in politics, in religion, in faith, in the law, there's a lot of gray area. But either you do what you say you're going to do, or you don't do what you say you're going to do. You either do what you agree to do, or you don't do what you agree to do. How is there a gray area in that? There's just not. Well, speaking of betrayal and valuing, now we're getting back in to a bit of the Beatles. And watching the Beatles documentary, which I thought was just great, 7.5 hours was not enough. I wanted to see the whole 60 hours, and I want to listen to all 80 hours of the audio tape. But one cannot help but wonder about the first son of John Lennon. His name is Julian Lennon. And in many ways, he was the abandoned and misbegotten son. And in the efforts of transparency, I will admit that in some ways I have a lot of similar experiences with Julian Lennon. Firstborn son, ignored, betrayed, if you will, by my father, who was forced by the divorce court, I guess, to stay 5 days after my birth to help, and then he could go off with his new lover and start a new family with her, which is exactly what he did. And then later tried to blend me with his family, which didn't really work out. So Julian Lennon was John Lennon's first son, and John was not particularly fond of Julian, it seems. And Yoko also was not very fond of Julian, and it appears the only reason they really didn't like him is that he was the first son, and he was not Sean Lennon, who was the son born of Yoko from John. So Julian spent a lot of his young life trying to connect with his father, and they did some things together, but when it came down to it, legally, when John was shot and killed, things did not go well for Julian. And Julian actually had a singing career. He had a couple of hit songs in the 80s. He did really well. Looks a lot like his dad, which I think really bothers the Yoko side of the family. And he sings well, and he had a couple of hit songs. So if you're comparing careers between the sons, between Julian and Sean, just from a data point of view, Julian has been much more successful and much more like his father. And Julian, growing up, always found it very difficult. And later in life, he turned to, I guess, drugs and alcohol and had a hard time, then came out of it, and he's okay now, which is a good thing. But what Julian had a hard time dealing with as a young boy growing up was his father, John Lennon, singing about love and harmony and peace in the world, and imagine this and imagine that, and love, love me do. And when it came to the realities of his own life, his father wasn't like that to him in any way. There was no love, there was no support, there was no emotional connection or attachment. And he found that a bit of a phony experience. And that extends very briefly to the larger question of what do you do with really talented people who turn out to be awful human beings? And we wonder about Woody Allen and how he destroyed his family just by the act of marrying an adopted daughter, or whatever she is. Destroyed a family. We wonder about Michael Jackson and the things that happen between him and young boys. We may never know all the full details of it, but the facts are there, the evidence is there, that makes us wonder about the morality of people who are famous and have a lot of money. Is it appropriate to hold them to a standard of morality and sophistication that maybe they don't own in their personal life? Is it proper for famous rich people to say one thing publicly and do another thing privately? I think it's hard to do. I think it splits your personality. I think it destroys the mask. People really prefer predictability in personality, no matter who you happen to be. They want you to be the same as you are at home, as you are in public. And some of that is nothing to do with being rich or famous. Some of it's regionality. If you grow up in the Midwest, you are to be, and you are a child, you are to be quiet, and you do not speak unless spoken to, and you behave. And you can act out at home, but once you get in public, oh, here come the neighbors. Oh, the neighbors are watching. Shape up, stand up straight, comb your hair. And if you don't comply, then you're a problem child. And you need to be punished. So who holds these people accountable? Who holds John Lennon accountable for how he treated his son Julian? The press, they don't care. They just want to sell newspapers. John Lennon's wife, Yoko, doesn't really seem to care. And we'll look at that why, and we'll see why in a moment. So when John Lennon was shot, everything that John Lennon had was given to Yoko. It was about, I think, $220 million US, I believe, was always left. And it all went to Yoko, and none of it to Julian. And that was a little sad, because, as it was reported in the news, Julian, the firstborn son, was not included in his father's will. Which is strange. I think there was a minimal trust fund that was set up when they originally divorced and Julian was abandoned by his father. That turned out to be like $100 a week or $100,000 in total, which is nothing compared to $220 million. So, what do you do if you're Julian Lennon and your father's gone? Well, there's really only one thing you can do. You pick up a phone and you call a lawyer and you sue the estate. And Julian did, which was very smart, because I believe in many ways that's the only language that Yoko knows and respects, the law. She's very good at it. And when you punch her back in court and she has to respond, then she has to respond. And she did respond. And the rumors are that Julian was given, settled for, paid off with $20 million, which is really quite wonderful and well-deserved. And just imagine if that had just been done at the beginning. Hey, you know, when I die, give my firstborn son this amount of money and tell him I love him and he had to have a good life. How hard would that be? But instead he had to fight for it. He had to sue for it. He had to get standing in court to say, wait a minute. And he's now used a lot of that money, that $20 million, to purchase a lot of Beatles paraphernalia. And you think, why? And so is Paul McCartney, buying a lot of Beatles paraphernalia. Why? Well, they didn't have access to it when they were the Beatles. Paul was writing hit songs, not collecting stuff, and Julian, trying to connect with his dead father, is trying to buy back the pieces of a life that escaped him. So I understand that. And I think Julian has a very nice collection of Beatles stuff that he's paid a lot of money for. And there are articles about how there's Julian on John's lap was treated, and how John told Julian he was the product of a whiskey bottle, whereas Sean was the product... Thanks for the follow! Whereas Sean was a product of love and intimacy. And that kind of stuff is just ridiculous and very painful for a child to hear or understand at any age. And so this is some of the stuff that Julian was trying to purchase. Letters that his father wrote about his mother, some of them very unkind. And also, Julian asked Yoko for postcards that young Julian had written to his father. And she said no, I believe. You can buy them at auction. In 1964, the Beatles were beginning to take the world by storm. 3 decades later, the son he walked out on as a 5-year-old seems to be doing just that in the absence of the childhood he would have had if his father had not abandoned his mother, Cynthia. Julian Lennon appears to be buying one. He was unmasked as the secret bidder who landed a series of lots at a London auction of Beatles memorabilia 2 weeks ago. and the items he bought were particularly poignant. First, and perhaps the most moving, were the scribbled notes for the song Hey Jude, written by Paul McCartney for Julian at the time of his parents' breakup, and originally entitled Hey Jules. Julian paid £25,000 for the notes as part of a £55,000 haul of vicarious memories. Among them were a series of postcards from around the world, originally addressed to Julian but lost over the intervening years. Julian's manager said that Lennon Jr. had only a few meetings with his father and just a few photographs together with him. Sad then that one of the postcards from Japan, costing pounds 4,140, should end lots of love to you and God bless Daddy, Yoko, and Sean. So what must that be like? To have to purchase back the memories of your father that are being withheld from you. Well, I'd like to have some of the postcards. Do you think I could have some of my dad's stuff? Sure, you can have whatever you want. Just go on over to the auction, make a bid, and we'll see if you can buy it, Julian. That's just terrible. I mean, I don't know how a person like that survives in the world. I guess a person like that survives in the world because they have $200 million of FU money, and that person doesn't care what the world thinks of her. Okay. If that's how you want to live your life. And I know that there are some people in the world who believe that Julian's fabulous success in the music business is a bit of a revenge compared to Sean's lack of talent in the music business. There is no comparing the two careers of the two sons. And it shouldn't be a competition. But Yoko made it a competition. A competition to purchase memories, a competition to fight for a little bit of your father's wealth. And why John didn't just take care of Julian in his real life while he was alive is the most confusing and disappointing part of it all. Oh, Dora's with us. Nothing can heal a broken heart. It's so sad. It's the truth. And you have to allow your heart to be broken, because otherwise you're a closed off and disconnected person, which I have been accused of being, so I try not to be that way, but I am a bit disconnected. And the greater question all of this asks us is, what do we value and why? Do we value the writer who contributes to a blog and then 20 years later takes back the work and claims ignorance and not knowing? Do we value the work of the author, or do we only value the act of the stealing back in the end? And you think of fathers and sons in that very delicate and intimate relationship. There's Dora. Good morning, Dora. I'm so glad you're with us. I hope you're staying bright and sunny today because it's very gloomy where we are. And it's a hard thing, as Julian Lennon, as me, to watch from afar as your father, successful or not, money or not, begins and creates a whole new life for himself and not for you, with a whole new family. And you become an afterthought. You're stuck with the old reject that the father didn't want, but that you have to have. And that's a difficult situation to have to deal with as a young child, to try to put all those feelings and emotions in play and in order. And it tends to want to disconnect you. Well, I'm going to cut that off because that's too painful to deal with. But when you're Julian Lennon, how can you cut it off? How can you hide from it? Your father's in your face. Doing this, doing that. Success here, success that. Hey, we're having a great time without you, Julian. Love you, Daddy. I mean, that's just painful. And as Julian says, how can I have a father who writes about imagining love and peace and prosperity and there's no war and we all love each other and I'll have a bed in with Yoko and we'll be nude and we'll go for peace on earth, where I have created a hellscape on earth for my son that I abandoned, who was conceived with a whiskey bottle. That's stuff you don't recover from, really. That's the kind of pain that lingers for a very long time. And I don't think that John ever tried to put it right with Julian. I think he probably thought he'd live for, another 50 years. And that one day would come where they could sit down and talk man to man and say, I'm sorry what happened. I'm sorry I ignored you. I'm sorry I abandoned you. It wasn't my intention. But it never happened. A couple of bullets and it's over. Now what are you going to do, Julian? You have no money and you have no memories. Well, it all goes back to the business deal. It all goes back to the money. You're not going to get any. And if you want a memory of me, your father, you're going to have to buy it back from my estate as Yoko sells everything. But I'm glad that Julian is okay. I'm glad he has some money. I'm glad he's able to purchase on the open market memories of his father. I'm not sure how many of us would want to do that, but it's important to Julian and his reconnection and his process. And that you can respect. So how do we value these relationships? Yes, Dora, some people don't have a heart. They don't, but then they claim they do in a song, which is really, really interesting. The disconnect between the reality of what they say in public and the reality of what they do in the dark at home. It's a very dismaying contemporary problem. And no one really held John Lennon accountable for how he treated his son, Julian. You would think that if any of this happened today, that the press would just eat him up and call him a hypocrite. But they don't. Now he's a martyr because he was shot in New York City. But the relationships are always tenuous. And they test you. And sometimes things can be put back together, and sometimes things are forever broken. And when things break, people tend to get hurt. And the suffering is the mark of trying to remain a moral human being. So you deal with the disappointment. You deal with the disappointment of a father who fails you. You deal with the disappointment of a friend who fails you. You deal with the disappointment of a life gone astray. And all you can do is try to wake up the next day and show up and say, "World, I am ready." So I do feel for Julian Lennon. And I wonder if he'll ever have an interesting relationship with Sean. I think it would be very difficult. Because I think from what you've read and what you can surmise, that Sean has kind of been told, no, stay away from Julian. Don't go over there. That's the old past. That's not the prime DNA. You have the prime DNA. That's the original first wife DNA. But I think Julian wouldn't mind. That's what I think. But what do I know? I'm just a streamer here on Boles TV. And I see we have an advertising pre-roll that's creeping up on us, so if I want to be the master of my own domain, as they say, I should call the ad myself, take a little blood pressure break, let the ads roll, and come back in a moment. So we're going to do that, and this time I'm going to remember to hit my intermission screen. I'll see you soon. Alright, we're back. I keep hitting the wrong button and showing you my browser when it's not ready. I'm trying to figure out where we are in the clock as I try to figure out what we've talked about, what we're not going to talk about, and what's left to talk about, and what I missed, and what's a big gaping hole. That's part of the fun of it. It's called live streaming here on Boles TV. So we've been talking a lot about relationships and morality and betrayal and family and all that pain and consternation that comes with it. And now we take a deeper dive into it. I want to talk about this for a couple of days, but I always seem to run out of time, and now we have plenty of time. And the reason I wanted plenty of time is because it's such an intricate, awful sort of topic that deserves moments of contemplation and deep breathing. We've talked about murder here in the past. And today we're going to talk about a purposeful murder that really has to do with virginity and women and fertility and all the awfulness that becomes it, that circles around it. And when I was growing up in Nebraska in the 1970s, life was pretty pristine. There was the football team at the university. You had your friends. You went out to play during the day. And when it started to get dark, the agreed upon idea of when it was time to return home is when the streetlights came on. And the streetlights would come on just when dusk was starting to settle. So it was still a slightly blue sky, but not a dark black sky. And that was it. We'd all be playing soccer, football, baseball, whatever. And the streetlights would come on, and we'd all look at each other and say, "Yeah, we gotta go home." And we'd break everything down and run home. Because you didn't want to really be outside at night, because in the Midwest, it's dark and scary at night. Not a lot of light, pools of light from these old street lamps. And so when something awful happens to a community and to a neighborhood, it makes you stop and think about your place in the world and if you're safe or not. And as a child, there was a terrible, terrible murder of a local young woman. Went to our school, was in our neighborhood. She lived 3 blocks away from me. And her name was Wendy Heil. Thank you for the follow. And Wendy Heil deserves to be remembered fondly, and not for the horribleness of her death. And so I have a domain name that is dedicated to her. And I'll show you where it goes right now. So you type in Wendy Heil, enter, and it takes you to this article that I wrote in 2009. I know who killed Wendy Heil. And Wendy Heil was a wonderful, kind young woman who was murdered it's difficult to talk about. Who was murdered, and later on found out that before he murdered her, he also raped her. So Wendy Heil was murdered and raped. And this person Mark Goldsberry came from a, I guess, connected family. And Wendy Heil is dead, and as far as I know, Mark is still alive. And here's where it gets difficult. Wendy Heil is dead, and Mark went on to have a life where, as I understand it, he got a well-paying, long-term job with a state institution, not a prison. And he married, and he had children. He had a life, a career, a marriage, children. And Wendy Heil has a grave. And her rape and death and murder destroyed her parents. Her death destroyed our neighborhood. Because we were living in fear. What happened to Wendy Heil? She's missing. She's disappeared. Where could she be? Where could she go? The streetlights are on, and Wendy Heil is not home. And you bring this up, and people say, oh, well, Mark paid his dues. He served his time. You have to let it go. Well, I don't have to let anything go. There are kids I know in our neighborhood who refuse to let Wendy Heil go. And as long as she is remembered, she stays alive within us who remember her. But the most fascinating part of this end game for Mark is not just what sort of woman would choose to marry a murderer and a rapist, and I'm speaking generally, but what sort of woman who would marry a murderer and a rapist would then choose to have children with a murderer and a rapist. And taking that conversation out of any sort of specific event and trying to go for the larger picture, I find the whole thing horrifyingly fascinating. Do you believe that evil and corruptness and immorality and the want for murder and rape is part of a person? Is it embedded in their DNA? Is it part of their local consciousness that can be passed on from generation to generation? I'm not sure I would want to find out. If I had the opportunity in a different life or a later life to marry someone who was a murderer and a rapist and say, hey, the past is the past. Let's have children together. Now, if you're dealing with the Greek and Roman gods, what would happen is the offspring, the progeny of the sinner, murderer, rapist, those children would lead awful, disfigured, punished lives and end up dying young as well. But I don't know if we have that kind of moral justice anymore in the world, or if it's just all myths and legends. But you wonder about the life that Wendy Heil could have had if it wasn't taken from her. And that leads us into our next heartbreaking and harrowing story. But first, we talked about this a couple of days ago. Does murdered mean disappeared? This is a podcast that I performed in 2016. Asking about Wendy Heil, our friend Oscar Long who disappeared, and Gina Boss. Murdered, all of them, or presumed dead, maybe. Who knows? We don't really know, except for Wendy Heil. And when I wrote about Wendy Heil, someone said, what about Gina Boss? Looked her up, just as dismaying as ever, as Oscar Long's disappearance. And that kind of coldness in killing, that kind of betrayal of the moral human spirit is something that is not easily shrugged off, but is also sort of a big part of the Midwestern culture in that things are sort of disconnected back there. At least it used to be. And you would see and hear terrible things, and you would just sort of block them off and pretend they didn't happen. And probably the most infamous case out of Nebraska is that of Carol Ann Fugate. Do you know Carol Ann? Carillann. Oops, I forgot the L. Carol Ann. Now, this is a story of a young woman who lost her life in prison, and her virginity and her innocence, as she was caught up by Charles Starkweather and his murderous rampage. So the women get hit in these stories. It isn't really the men who pay, it's the women who pay. Here's my little blurb about this Human Meme podcast I did in 2016. Carol Ann Fugate was kidnapped by Charles Starkweather. We re-examine the 1958 case of Carol Ann and her Starkweather captor. Charles Starkweather murdered 11 people, including members of Carol Ann's family. Carol Ann Fugate was implicated in the killings by her kidnapper, and she was given a life sentence. This is her story. This is the exoneration of Carol Ann Fugate. And I'll play a little bit of it for you. I won't play the whole thing. You can go listen to it if you want. Welcome. This is David Boles, Human Meme. Today's topic: crime story, the peril of Carol Ann. It was a slow gin sort of day in Lincoln, Nebraska, with a pomegranate sun dying hard against a slate gray sky, as 13-year-old Carol Ann met Charlie, a red-haired boy who loved James Dean and was 5 years her senior. Charlie didn't like people much, except for Carol Ann. Schoolmates bullied him early in his life. He stuttered and was born bow-legged. However, once Charlie started lifting weights, he found his power. He learned how to defend himself. And Charlie knew it was his job in life to take down anyone above him. And that meant most of the rest of the world. Okay, so that's the introduction. I'll put the link to that podcast here in chat. You can click on it if you like. So this whole idea of Carol Ann Fugate as Charlie Starkweather's enabler completely falls apart if you just do a little bit of research and you do a little bit of reading about what happened. She was 13 years old. He murdered her family and took her, threatening her life. You're going to end up like your family, dead, if you don't do what I say. And then suddenly in the newspapers, oh, it's Bonnie and Clyde. Oh, she joined him. She's a killer too. She could have stopped him. Stopped him how? He's the one who had the guns. She's sitting in the car. And after all of these years, since 1958, Carol Ann is as guilty as Charles Starkweather. And it's wrong. But that's the common theme. She was part of it. She was there. She's not innocent anymore. She's not a virgin. She's with Charles Starkweather. She has blood on her hands. She could have escaped at any time she wanted to. None of it's true. If you only bother to ask and to look. And I have one comment on this podcast page of mine. And it infuriates me because it's from an idiot who didn't even listen to the podcast. Probably just read the introduction on page. And of course disagreed with it because know nothings, know everything, right? Kidnapped? Pretty sure she was a willing participant. Meow. Well, that's the definition of a very stupid person who only cares to know what he's been told and not what he should know and not the reality of what actually happened. And you do not have to listen to me. Immortalized in Springsteen's Nebraska, the former girlfriend of notorious killer Charles Starkweather asks for a pardon. This is from the state of Nebraska. There's Charlie, there's Carol Ann. This was in 2020. She was on the brink of 40 when she immortally became the girl in the Bruce Springsteen song Nebraska, standing in front of her lawn just twirling her baton. And she's changed her name now. She's Carol Ann Clare. Dora, I remember the case. Didn't they make a movie? Badlands? Yes. Lots of movies. Oh, Charles Starkweather's like... There are people who idolize him for being against the authorities and standing up and being on a crime spree. It's just ridiculous. So she's trying to get a pardon. Her attorney, John Barry, who is really a terrific guy, told the Washington Post this morning that he hopes officials overseeing a more enlightened justice system will see Claire Fugate as a child victim coerced into the car by a manipulative boyfriend. She was convicted in what Barry calls the bad old days before defendants had Miranda rights, and long before the justice system acknowledged the vulnerability of juveniles. At her trial, Starkweather, by then sentenced to death, served as the chief witness against her, claiming she was the willing participant, something Barry says he believes never should have happened. There are people in Nebraska, the ones who remember this. They can't quote Chief Standing Bear or Willa Cather, but by God, they can quote Charles Starkweather when he said, "She should be sitting on my lap in the electric chair." Kidnapped. Pretty sure she was a willing participant. And here's what Dora mentioned. Claire Fugate's guilt or innocence has been a subject of great debate in decades after the infamous Rohr's 1973 film Badlands, loosely based on their crimes, did not help Fugate's case, depicting a Bonnie and Clyde-like rampage throughout the Badlands. But by Carol Ann's telling, she was terrified and did whatever he wanted me to do, as he told me. Excuse me, his gang had my family held hostage. That's what he told her. I have your family hostage. They were all dead. And they would be murdered if I didn't do what he said. And then it gets even more interesting. The granddaughter of the Starkweather victims says Carol Ann Fugate deserves a pardon. The people who know say Carol Ann Fugate deserves a pardon. People who are the descendants of the dead. Kidnapped. Pretty sure she was a willing participant. The granddaughter of 2 of the 11 victims of Charles Starkweather's murderous spree said Monday that Starkweather's girlfriend, Carol Ann Fugate, deserves a pardon. Liza Ward, whose grandparents were killed in their Lincoln Country Club home in December of 1958, said she's convinced that then 14-year-old Fugate was an unwilling hostage who was terrorized by Starkweather to accompany him, and he could not escape, and she could not escape. Someone who did the research. I could not find a single piece of evidence that she was guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. What I found, in fact, was that she was the victim of a system, an old boys network that was fueled by the anger, fear, and grief of time. Kidnapped. Pretty sure she was a willing participant. It was just unbelievable to me, the miscarriage and mishandling of justice. So can you imagine this guy goes out, Charles Starkweather, kills, murders all these people, and then he's the one person that the state believes? She did it! She was in the car with me. She's just as guilty as I am. And they believed him. Fugate, who has maintained her innocence, and she always did, was convicted of first-degree murder and felony murder in the commission of a robbery and spent 17 years in prison. And she was paroled in 1976. But Lincoln lawyer John Stevens Barry, who represents Fugate, who now goes by her married name Caroline Clare, said she was wrongly convicted based on the testimony of Starkweather, who changed his story and implicated her after being informed that she, Carol Ann, did not want to ever see him again. So after that trigger, what do you mean you don't want to see me again? What? Oh, you killed people too. She was railroaded, she was innocent, said Barry. They should give her a pardon because it's the right thing to do. And of course, because of the world in which we live, the old boy network. Kidnapped. Pretty sure she was a willing participant. Pardons board members defend the vote to deny a pardon for Carol Ann Fugate, Charles Starkweather's girlfriend. Two members of the Nebraska Board of Pardons defended their denial Tuesday of a pardon for the girlfriend of mass killer Charles Starkweather, saying that Carol Ann Fugate's request was without merit and beyond the scope of what a pardon accomplishes. This is in 2020. The board, which consists of Governor Pete Ricketts, Attorney General Doug Peterson, and Secretary of State Bob Evnen, voted unanimously and without comment to deny the request from Fugate, who is now 76 years old and uses her married name, Caroline Clare. Hours after the swift decision, a spokesman for Ricketts said that Clare participated in crimes that were horrific and depraved and created immense public fear. Kidnapped. Pretty sure she was a willing participant. Carol Ann Clare's story continues to change, and the governor sees no grounds for a pardon, said the spokesman. The only board member to comment during the meeting was Peterson, who said just after the vote that Clare's stated reason for seeking a pardon to seek relief from the terrible burden of being labeled a murderer was beyond the scope of what a pardon could accomplish. Well, that's not true. That's not the role of the pardons board, Peterson said. Pardons, he said, do not erase a person's criminal record, but are typically sought to restore someone's right to vote, bear arms, or run for political office. So I guess if Carol Ann said, well, you know, I really want to be president, so if you just pardon me, I could run for president. Not that I was wrongfully accused by the person who murdered all these people. That's not a good enough reason to seek a pardon. I want to be pardoned because I want to run for office. And now I'm going to be hit with an ad break. We'll be right back in a moment to continue this wonderful conversation. Back in a flash. And we're back from our break. Oh, what a show this is. Boles.tv. A day of outrage. Of moral and verifiable outrage. So when you think of Wendy Heil, and when you think of Caroline Fugate, you cannot escape the fact that there is a certain amount of slut-shaming going on in each of their cases. And I remember when Wendy Heil was missing, and then they found her later, and the person who raped and murdered her, there was just a little tinge of, well, you know, Wendy was very friendly. You know, if you went to her house and you knocked on her door, she would answer the door. Now, this is in the 1970s in Lincoln, Nebraska. So there was already that vibe that somehow, you know, Wendy dressed or behaved or invited her own murder. And you still see that today. In some of these rape cases, murder cases, well, she dressed provocatively. She was very low-cut top, and what reasonable young man can resist that? I remember reading 25 years ago something in the newspaper about this woman who was accusing this football player of raping her. And his attorney said, oh, it's impossible that he would rape her. They had willing sex because he's so big that there's no way that he could get it into her without her wanting it. I read that, I thought, that's a defense to rape? It's a very treacherous time to be a woman in America and the world, and it always has been. The burden of proof on behavior is on the young woman, unfortunately, instead of on the man. But then the other side of it is, well, they were both drinking, they were both drunk, and they had sex, or it was rape. Well, now it's kind of turned where it's the boy's fault, and some people say, well, wait a minute, if the boy is drunk too, and the boy can't make a decision, he's out of it, how is he to blame? I don't know. It's very sticky. But the cases of Wendy Heil and Caroline Fugate are not sticky in any way. And as you can see in this, the way that the pardons board and that stupid person commenting on my podcast page, well, Caroline, you know, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, they're into murder. They're just willing participants in it. They just can't get enough of it. With Starkweather, who's completely insane in every way, and everyone who knew him, a troublemaker from way back, finds a young, sweet, innocent girl in the Midwest named Carol Ann Fugate. Says he kidnaps her family, kills everybody, and blames it all on her. Well, she's just a big part of it, too. And they met when she was 13. Went on the crime spree when he was 14, when she was 14. I call that slut shaming. Kidnapped? Oh, she was a willing participant. Well, the Pardons Board, if she wanted to run for governor, that'd be different. But if she just wants to clear her name of being slut-shamed, well, we don't pardon that. Sorry. We're the state of Nebraska. And as we were having our break, I remember back when I was at UNL, University of Nebraska-Lincoln, must have been, what, 83, 84? I had a sociology class. And I was writing plays and working on things all the time back then. And I had a sociology class with Jay Corzine. And the thing I remember about Jay is he had wild long hair, brown long hair. And he wore Birkenstocks with white socks. Now, this is Midwest Nebraska in the early 80s. And there were some crazy personalities at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. There was a Marxist in the English department. There was a woman in the English department who would bring her big dog to every class. Now, I don't think you could do that today because people have allergies, people are afraid of dogs, but she brought her dog every day. But she said, if you don't want my dog here, tell me, I'll go put him up in my office. Well, who's going to say no? You worried about your grade. And Jay Corzine would come into class. Ah, look, he's wearing Birkenstocks. Ah, that's what they do in California. Ah, you must be some kind of liberal, some of the students said. And then there was a big table, and most teachers go sit behind the table. They have a lectern, sit behind the lectern. And Jay would come into class with Birkenstocks and sit on the table, the front edge of the table, and swing his legs, his Birkenstocks with his white socks, and he would talk to us as if we were human beings. A lot of professors just go in there and lecture, no matter what level you are at, and you take notes, and then you leave and you go home, and don't speak to me because I'm the professor. But Jay didn't do that. And maybe it's because he was not from there. And we had to write a special project, and I said, I've always been bothered by this Starkweather thing, Jay. We could call him Jay. Others want to be called Professor Corzine, Professor whatever your name is. But sometimes they say, don't call me that, just call me by my name. I'm Jay, I'm not Dr. Corzine. And I said I would love to see if I could get an interview with Carol Ann Fugate. She was at the Nebraska Penitentiary. And he said, go for it. I said, really? You would allow that? He said, yes. So I said, okay, what do I do? He said, write her a letter. Okay, so I wrote her 3 letters to Carol Ann Fugate. Never heard back. Went back to Jay. Said, Jay, now what do I do? He said, call on the phone. Okay. So I called the state penitentiary. I call on the phone. Hey, I sent 3 letters to Carol Ann Fugate. She's not... Remember, I'm 18 or 19. She's not replying to me. What can I do? And I spoke to a very nice person who said, well, I'm sure she received your letters, but I don't know. Secondly, she doesn't have to respond to you if she doesn't want to. Ugh. So I wrote a 4th letter. Carol Ann, I tried to reach her by phone. I've sent you 3 letters. Is it possible, if you don't want to talk on the phone, if I can't meet you, can I send you 5 questions to ask you? And I'm not trying to persecute you. I'm not trying to say that, you were not kidnapped and that this was all your choice. I never heard back from her. And so I went to Jay Corzine. I said in his office, I said, Jay, I've done everything I've tried. I have a week left. And I don't have a paper. What am I going to do? He said, I was with you every step of the way. for your paper, write up all the things you were thinking about, why you wanted to do this, how you talked to me, what steps you took, include copies of the letters that you sent, which I did have, and it all was on a typewriter, not a word processor, that's why I had to make copies. And give that to me, and that's your paper. Don't worry about it, you get an A. I said, really? He said, yes. He said, you have worked so hard on this paper, and sometimes the process of finding out is more important than getting the result that you hope for in the end. Now that's a teacher. So on the break, I went to find him. Where's Jay? Is he still at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln? No, he's not. And you can see he still has the long, beautiful hair, beautiful beard. Must be 100 years old by now, because when I knew him, my gosh, he was a young guy, but that was 40 years ago. Originally from Illinois, small town. He's now at the University of Central Florida, UCF. And he was into sociology. He is into crime and homicide. Homicide studies. Fabulous. What a wonderful guy. So if you know him, if you've seen him, say hello to Jay for me. He was a wonderful, wonderful teacher. Let's see if he says anything about Nebraska. We gotta go way back in time for this one. Here we go. Here we go. 82 to 84. When I knew him, undergraduate chair, Department of Sociology, University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Heck yeah. Before that, assistant professor, Department of Sociology, University of Nebraska-Lincoln. Graduate fellow. So what are you going to do with a guy like that? Oh, there's all, here you go. All this is Nebraska. Fabulous. Then in 2000, went to, I guess, Florida. Professor, Department of Sociology. Graduate Chair, Department of Sociology. Associate Professor, Department of Sociology. Tenure in 84. There you go. So that's where wonderful people come from. And people you never forget. And you know, I wonder, I've taught myself for many years. And I always wonder, you know, I have these superstar students that I know and love, and I think they're just terrific. And then they graduate, you never hear from them again. It's like, well, what happened? What? You were so terrific. You never check back in and give me an update. And then I asked myself, hey, now, you've had some really terrific teachers throughout your life. Jay Corzine is one of them. Charles Stubblefield at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln was one who recently died. He lived to a very old age. How many times did you reach out to them? How many times did you reconnect with them and say, hey, I really appreciate you. I think you're a wonderful person. You mean a lot to me. How many of your former professors have you done that to for? And my answer is none. I don't know why. Shy? Past life? I don't know. So I realize I can't get upset or even concerned when I don't hear from my students because I never got back in touch with my professors in the past. Except for some of the people at Columbia. Howard Stein. Teacher, professor, good friend. And that was Howard's doing. He's the one who wanted to stay in touch, really. That was wonderful. And Howard would always say, when you graduate, you're gone. I don't want to hear from you again. He would say that to us in class. He said, if you need a letter, I'll give you a letter. But when you're gone, we're done. And so I took him at that. I said, okay. And then he would say, David, I haven't heard from you. And I said, well, Howard, for the last semester of class, you said when you're done, you're done. I don't want to hear from you again. David, I wasn't talking to you. How do I know unless you tell me? Now I know. And then we go, boom. We collaborate for the next 20 years together. Hey, Dora's asking a question. Question from left field. Can you microwave eggs? I almost had an incident of exploding eggs. Please disregard me and continue the discussion. Well, that's an interesting question. Well, you know, Dora, you know me, but you don't know me. And now you've triggered me. Because the OCD is very strong in this one. Can you microwave an egg? I don't know the answer. I do have a microwave. So, is it safe to microwave eggs? Yes, it's safe to cook eggs in the microwave, whether you wish to poach, scramble, or fry your eggs. Sometimes microwave eggs taste better than stovetop eggs, but I guess you have to crack them open first, right? Because otherwise they'd explode. For example, you can make perfectly poached eggs in a microwave without needing to form a whirlpool. Why can't you microwave an egg? Well, you have to break the eggs out of their shells first before microwaving. Never microwave eggs in shells. Dora, were you microwaving in a shell or out of a shell? Come out of your shell to answer. If you cook an egg in a shell microwave, it's likely to explode. Microwaves heat so quickly that steam builds up in the egg faster than an egg can exhale through its pores, and the steam bursts through the shell. With a shell? Oh! No shell. So I guess you need to take your egg, crack it into a microwave-safe bowl, and then try to cook it in the microwave. Is there an advantage, Dora, to cooking in a microwave instead of cooking it on a stovetop? I don't know the answer. Oh, now we get even more specific. What is the proper way to microwave an egg? Well, medium high, 70% power. That's what I thought. Okay, we'll try. Microwave on high, 70% power. Now, I didn't know that you can set power on a microwave. Our microwave here is relatively new, and there's only one button on it, and it's go. I don't know how to set a high power or a low power. For a minute and 30 seconds or a minute and 45 seconds, stirring several times during cooking. I guess that's interesting. Because otherwise, part of it's going to be gelatinous, the other part's going to be overcooked, I guess, if you don't stir it. Then cover and let stand for 30 seconds to 1 minute before serving. Eggs will look slightly moist, but will finish cooking upon standing. That is the secret to microwave cooking. It's not done cooking until 5 minutes after you take it out of the oven. And that's a hard lesson to learn if you're hungry. You have to just let it sit there for a while. Probably smarter just to leave it in the microwave oven. Because I learned that when I microwave something and I take it out, I want to eat it right away. So if I leave it in the oven with the door closed, it's safer for me because then it finishes cooking and doesn't finish cooking down my throat. How do you microwave an egg without exploding? Microwave. Oh, here you go, Dora. Microwave a bowl of water deep enough to submerge the egg for 3 minutes until hot. Lightly pick up the bottom of the egg with a safety pin or a thumbtack to prevent the egg from exploding. Place the egg in the bowl of hot water, cover with a plate, and microwave at 50% power for 4 minutes. I think playing with the power settings is very dangerous. Because people don't know what 50% is. You need to put down watts. That's the only way you can do it. Because if somebody has an 800-watt microwave and I have a 1600-watt microwave, half power for that one is 4, half power for me is 8. So my half power is their full power. It's not a smart way to move it. Well, that was fun. I love things out of left field. That's what chat's supposed to be for. It's not supposed to be sitting here lecturing about dead people. So we have talked about eggs. We did not play any Not Bobby Fischer chess, which we will one day because it's a lot of fun. And we talked about Julian Lennon. Talked a lot about family today. Talked a lot about murder. Talked a lot about the betrayal of a friendship that just begins and stings. Not a good thing. Well, I am so glad you joined us today. You can find us online at boles.tv. Subscribe if you really want to support the stream, because you will remove all advertising. Oh, here we go. Dora's back. I know you know I can't hear from one ear, so this and boiled eggs at a time I couldn't hear it when it went off and sprinted from my chair to turn off the stove. Oh, that's interesting. Well, I'm glad you're experimenting to find the right way to get this done. And if you subscribe to this live stream, just in time, that's good. I'm glad that worked out. Yeah, microwaving might be safer. And I guess you can poach if you boil the water first and then put the egg in the water and then it just poaches itself. That could be a very interesting experiment. And by subscribing, you support this stream. You will not have any advertising, and you will be able to watch the video on demand as you wish. Otherwise, if you follow, and if you just watch every day at 9 o'clock, you'll get a little bit of advertising, and you'll be able to see this stream for free, so you can do it that way too. It's just good to have you here. And you can ask any question you want in chat. Even if I'm talking about murder and loss of virginity and victim blaming, ask about eggs. I'm up for experimenting. I'm good. Experimenting is wonderful. That's the whole point of living, is finding out what works and what doesn't work. And even if people tell you you cannot microwave an egg and you cannot microwave an egg, well, I think I can. And go find out. Thank you so much, Binky the Dinky, for following. We hope you subscribe. If you subscribe, no advertising. You can be in the chat. Our chat is only for subscribers because we had an incident very early on with a troll, and we don't like the troll. And now, to be in chat, you have to be phone verified, email verified, and you have to subscribe. It makes for a very clean, exotic conversation, which I much prefer. I don't really have to take too close of an eye on it because we don't have a lot of people in chat right now. But if I miss something you say, just ask again and I'll look down and I'll find it. Because sometimes when I get on a rant, my eyes blur. So if you have questions, you can find me online at Twitter at David Boles. If you prefer Facebook, go to our business page, facebook.com/Boles. On Instagram, Boles Books. And here on Twitch, we are now Boles TV. B-O-L-E-S-T and a V. As a username instead of Boles Books. Just because it's shorter, easier to remember, more on point and brand centric. So we're going to have a very interesting show tomorrow, based on what happened today. I thank you for joining us. I'm very delightful that we helped Dora with her eggs. And tomorrow, maybe we'll help you with a watermelon. Or maybe even a pineapple. Until then, I will see you tomorrow, 9 a.m. Eastern. Take care and be well.